Okay, picture this. It's February 1815. On this tiny little island called Elba, off the coast of Italy, a man who just a year ago ruled almost all of Europe is now basically the king of goats and fishermen. But this isn't just any man. This is Napoleon Bonaparte. And for someone like him, exile isn't the end of the story. No, it's just a pause before one last incredible roll of the dice to get it all back. I mean, just listen to that line. With those 7 words, Napoleon is about to turn an entire army sent to capture him into his personal fan club. It's a moment that just perfectly sums up the unbelievable magnetic nerve of a man who is about to set Europe on fire one last time. It's really hard to wrap your head around how far he'd fallen. You go from controlling more of Europe than anyone since the Roman emperors to this, being stuck on a small island. And you gotta understand, for a guy with Napoleon's ego, the ultimate punishment wasn't being a prisoner. It was being irrelevant. It was being forced to just sit there and watch the world go on without him. But you see, the world was having some trouble moving on. The guys who beat him, they were all in Vienna, squabbling like kids over who got what piece of his old empire. And back in France, the new king they installed, Louis XVIII, was, let's just say he wasn't winning any popularity contests. Pretty soon, letters started showing up on Elba, all saying the same thing: France wants you back. And that was all the encouragement he needed. So, in the middle of the night, Napoleon decides, you know what, let's change history again. He grabs 1,000 of his most loyal guys, they sneak onto some boats, and they set sail for France. Their goal, a final showdown with literally all of Europe. So when the news gets to that big meeting in Vienna, it's just pure chaos. You can just imagine it, right? All these kings and diplomats just freaking out. The nightmare that had haunted them for almost 20 years was back, and he was heading their way. And this is where his personal charisma just goes into overdrive. The king sends the 5th Regiment to stop him, right? With orders to shoot him on sight. So what does Napoleon do? He just walks right up to them, opens his coat, and says, "Go on, shoot your emperor." And they don't. The soldiers just lower their guns and start cheering, "Long live the emperor." They don't just surrender, they join his army. From that point on, his march to Paris wasn't a military campaign. It was a victory parade. Every single army they sent to stop him ended up joining him. The new king literally packed his bags and fled the country. And get this, just 20 days after he landed, Napoleon walks into Paris and takes back his throne. The emperor was home. But Napoleon's epic comeback had one immediate and really bad side effect for him. It instantly stopped all that bickering in Vienna. Suddenly, all his old enemies, Britain, Prussia, Russia, Austria, they were best friends again. They declared him an outlaw, basically putting a giant target on his back, and promised to send a massive army to crush him for good. Now, before that whole giant coalition could get organized, there were 2 armies already waiting in Belgium, kind of like Europe's first line of defense. You had an Allied army led by the British Duke of Wellington and a huge Prussian force led by a tough old general named Marshal von Blücher. So, if you're Napoleon, you've got a massive choice to make. Do you hang back, build up your army, and play defense against a huge invasion? Or do you do the Napoleonic thing and go for broke with a surprise attack?
Come on, you knew what he was gonna do. This is Napoleon. He knew that if those 2 armies linked up, he was outnumbered, badly. So he comes up with this brilliant, risky plan. Hit him first and hit him fast. He's gonna drive his army like a wedge right between Wellington and Blücher, beat them one at a time, and win before they even knew it was happening. But his whole plan depended on one thing: speed. And this is where fate, or I guess the weather, steps in. The night before the big attack, there's this huge thunderstorm. It turns the entire battlefield into a sea of mud. He can't move his cannons, so he has to wait, and that delay is going to cost him dearly. So the first clashes happen. At a place called Ligny, Napoleon beats the Prussians. But, and this is super important, he doesn't destroy them. They manage to escape. Meanwhile, his top general, Marshal Ney, hesitates at a key moment, which gives Wellington just enough time to get his defenses ready. So phase 1 of the plan, it worked, but not perfectly.
And all of this sets the stage for the final legendary battle near a little village called Waterloo. You've got these 3 absolute legends of military history about to face off, with the future of Europe hanging in the balance. And can we just take a second to appreciate that Blücher, the Prussian commander, was 72 years old and still leading cavalry charges? What a legend. So, In the middle of the battle, Napoleon has to hand over command for a bit to Marshal Ney. Ney looks across the field, sees some Allied troops moving over a hill, and makes a huge assumption. They're running away. He thinks this is it, the moment to break them, and he launches an attack without getting orders. And we're not talking about a small attack. Ney unleashes 9,000 of France's best cavalry in one of the biggest charges in history. Just imagine the ground shaking. They thunder up this ridge, expecting to just smash through a broken, fleeing army. But here's the thing. Wellington wasn't retreating. He was just moving his troops. And when he sees this tidal wave of horses coming at him, he gives one of the most famous commands ever: form squares. His guys lock together into these tight boxes, creating little fortresses of men and bayonets all over the field. Now, that French cavalry could destroy infantry out in the open, but against these squares, they were useless. The horses just wouldn't charge into a wall of pointy steel. The French riders just get picked off, wave after wave, in what was a catastrophic waste of Napoleon's best troops. Just as Wellington's army is stretched to the absolute breaking point, they hear cheering. It's Blucher. Remember the Prussians who got away? Well, the old man kept his promise. His army arrives and just smashes right into Napoleon's flank. For Napoleon, the clock had just run out. He's desperate now, fighting for his life. So Napoleon plays his last card. He sends in the Imperial Guard. These guys were the most feared soldiers in Europe. Elite veterans who had never, ever been defeated in battle. They were his ace in the hole, his last desperate gamble. But Wellington had one last trick up his sleeve. As the Guard marched over the hill, he had 1,500 of his own troops hiding, lying down in the grass. He yells for them to stand up, and they unleash a massive volley of gunfire at point-blank range. The Guard stumbles, and then, for the very first time in their history, they ran. And the sight of their invincible heroes running away just shattered the will of the whole French army. And just like that, it was over. Napoleon's incredible comeback, this whole period we now call the 100 Days, came to a bloody end on that muddy field. 4 days later, he gave up the throne for the second and final time. The impact of this one day was absolutely huge. Napoleon was shipped off to St. Helena, a lonely island in the middle of nowhere, and he never came back. Europe, after decades of war, actually got about a century of relative peace. And Prussia, one of the big winners, started to become a major powerhouse, totally changing the balance of power in Europe. Which brings us to a really interesting final thought. The rise of Prussia eventually led to the creation of the powerful German Empire, an empire that, about 100 years later, would build one of the scariest armies the world had ever seen and kick off a conflict that would make the Napoleonic Wars look like a small-time brawl by comparison. Makes you wonder, doesn't it?